Russian master Andrei Tarkovsky's final movie, The Sacrifice. Why do I think this movie's great? I have a lot to say about it. I want to help you understand it. Although this is a very dreamy movie. Let's talk about The Sacrifice coming up after this. Right, so Andrei Tarkovsky shot The Sacrifice in 1985 in Sweden. He learned sometime during the filming, I think he knew himself, and then later on as he was editing the movie, he learned that he was dying of cancer. I think that informs, or should inform, your viewing of this movie, including him picking the final image of the movie, including what happens in this movie overall. Think about a dying man making this particular movie. This is really a well-crafted movie, but the story seems a little bit absurd at least. The story concerns Alexander, a professor of aesthetics, who is at his remote home and it's his birthday. He has a number of family and friends coming to help celebrate his birthday. During the birthday celebration, in fact later at night, you hear jets rumble over the house, and then the news on TV that World War III has broken out. Now the movie takes almost half its runtime to get to that very point. And you have to remember this is the mid-1980s when the threat of nuclear war, the Cold War era nuclear war, was still around and a very serious problem, and a number of people, in fact probably the whole world, was worried about it. In the middle of the movie, and exactly in the middle of the movie in terms of its runtime, Alexander breaks down and by himself he begins weeping, praying to God. He prays the Lord's Prayer, and then he requests of God that things would be completely different, and he pledges that he will sacrifice something. I won't say what, but he will sacrifice something if God changes things and reverts things back to the way they were the day before nuclear war. In other words, getting rid of World War III entirely. Now, the movie therefore has tones and allusions to the Abraham story from the book of Genesis. The presumably or seemingly irrational decision to sacrifice something in order to honor God, who is going to give something to the man of faith, Abraham. In the Abraham story, Alexander in the case of this movie. The movie is full of philosophical conversations, some that are pretentious, some that I find quite serious. The opening shot, which is like 6 or 7 minutes long, brings in Nietzsche and the idea of eternal recurrence. It brings in the question of faith and faithfulness. Could that change things? Could that change the world? And the opening shot and the closing shots are very much related. In fact, the closing shots are sort of a continuation of one of the stories told in the opening shots. This movie is very slow, but if you're patient and observe and probably take notes, it will greatly reward you, I think, because it's done that to me several times. Now, the best I can do here is help observe a few things, and you're going to have to make of it what you will. First, this movie is definitely an homage to one of Tarkovsky's, perhaps even Tarkovsky's favorites, Ingmar Bergman. The movie, of course, is shot in Sweden. It's shot in a remote island location like the island of Faroe. It may be even shot on Faroe, which is Bergman's chosen home and a place he really loved and showed in at least half of his movies. So you have that setting alone is really neat. Then Tarkovsky uses Bergman's cinematographer, one of them, Sven Nykvist here, and the actor Erland Josephson, who appeared in a number of Bergman movies. In spite of all of that, this is distinctly Tarkovsky style. Very long shots. Usually the camera is far away from the actors, as opposed to Bergman, who liked to show faces up close so often. And the pacing and the story, and there's all kinds of number of elements that even though it's an homage to Bergman, this isn't a Bergman movie, it's definitely Tarkovsky. In fact, because he, I think, knew that this could be his last movie or one of his last, he alludes to all of his filmography. I mean, all of it, including The Mirror, his autobiographical film. Number of literal mirrors in this movie, a number of classic shots like water leaking through roofs, for example. You also get Nostalgia, his previous movie that he shot a few years before this, including the cinematography, the black and white or near black and white cinematography looks quite a bit like Nostalgia. You should observe then that the color scheme over the course of this movie gets progressively more and more and more black and white, even washed out black and white at times. And then you get the ending where the color comes back in or pops back in. This is classic Hollywood sort of stuff like Wizard of Oz. And I think you should have that in mind, the difference between reality and fantasy, real life and dreams. Certainly that happens in Tarkovsky's entire filmography. Here it's quite interesting, in part because this movie It's great because it's so complex and turns out to be ambiguous. Certain viewers are going to watch this and find that the entire movie is true. Everything that is in the movie really happened. But then others are going to come along and say, most of the things in this movie didn't happen or they're a dream. And it's everything in between. You could say all of it's real, or you could say most of it, maybe nearly all of it, is unreal. And then someone will come along and say, well, this part is a dream, but the rest of it is reality. And whichever one you choose, you probably will have a very different interpretation and view of this movie. And that is, if you think it's all real, that'll lead you down a few paths, but if you think most of it's a dream, that'll lead you down other paths. And there's a lot of questions in this movie. Did the World War III event really happen? What happened after it, for example, is that real or not? I won't give anything away, but this man, Alexander in the movie, seems to be a man of faith on the one hand, but he does something that would be considered immoral, certainly in terms of his own religious beliefs. As well, disturbing, this movie has a little bit of misogynist bent with the men in this movie, and I think Alexander's choice later on is in line with that. And thus you have this question of, does he sin in order to save the world, or is he a man of faith in order to save the world? That is one actual dilemma, in the Abraham story. Who's going to go murder his son, kill his son because God told him to? The question of the rationality of faith and so on. And that comes up in this movie. Is Alexander a man of faith, or is he doing something devilish in order to save the world? Well, would he do anything to save the world? Other things to observe, there are a number of scenes of collapsing or falling down, characters falling down all over the place. This could hint at Tarkovsky's own condition, could be autobiographical. It also is a movie about the fall of civilization, specifically the fall of Europe, Western civilization. You notice in the movie, for example, Alexander gets that map of Europe. Is this a different Europe? A changed Europe with the World War III event happening? Is this a downfall entirely of European civilization? It's one of the questions that comes up with this movie. There's also the question of the little boy called Little Man in this movie. Alexander's little boy here, who is very interestingly lost in a number of places. And I think that the dynamic between Abraham and Isaac and Alexander and this little man comes up. He's lost. Where is he? We don't know where he is. And I'll leave it to you to figure out where he is at the end of the movie. It is revealed, and I think it's quite interesting. As I said, it pairs up with the first shot. I personally found Little Man to be an interesting moniker. They don't, I think, ever give his name, but Little Man, at least in English, is an amalgam of Fat Man and Little Boy, the two atomic bombs dropped on Japan, and Japan, of course, comes up in this movie, and the atomic, Holocaust comes up in the movie as well as a plot point. So the boy is a sign of the future of civilization, the continuance of a lineage, which is a topic in the movie, but he's also a hint at destruction, the future destruction of the world, perhaps. You'll also note that there is little to no soundtrack in this movie. It's a wonderful soundscape. Tarkovsky is one of the best ever with sounds. The boat horn is this longing sort of sound effect that happens throughout the movie, along with the ocean waves. Tarkovsky loves wind. Wind can sometimes mean vast, sweeping change. Sometimes it can mean the Holy Spirit for him, and maybe both. And finally, that image of the tree. At the beginning of the movie, the ending of the movie, trees come up throughout. Being lost in a dark forest is a key element in Tarkovsky's whole filmography, I find. And setting up a tree and trying to water the tree. In the question of tree of life versus the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it's a Christian theological concept that comes up. And can we replace the tree of life? Can we get it going again? Is one of the key elements of this movie. I won't say why, but it is one of these associational objects that you'll have to figure out what it means for you and how it ties in with the major elements of the movie. I haven't explained very much because I don't think there's a lot to explain here. This is an experience that must be experienced multiple times. I think including in middle age and older age, and I'm not quite there to the older age camp, but I think this movie will watch differently over a period of one's life. And again, to think about this movie being edited, at least, by a man who knew he had lung cancer and had a death sentence, and that this would be his final movie, is very touching and profound. And his final movie is about Abrahamic sacrifices, who is God, what is faith, what's the future of civilization, will we annihilate ourselves? He's thinking about all those topics, along with general appreciation of life and living and art. Whether you think some of this movie or all of it's real, it is a hallucinatory dream. It is fantastic, and that's one of the reasons I like this movie. It hypnotizes me just right. I think a number of viewers may hate it, but I think a lot of you will love this, especially those of you who are into slow cinema, and you've already appreciated something by Tarkovsky. This is definitely something you should try at least. What do you think of The Sacrifice? What do you think of what I said in this video? Let us know in the comments. Please subscribe to this channel for more great content. Thank you. Have a great day.